Hello there again, and welcome back to Agrc 102. And Unit 5 is going to cover feed regulations and additives. Kind of a brief pause here at about the halfway point in the course, where we're going to kind of break away from simple ingredients and beginnings of ration balancing and talk about some of the regulatory nature and especially additives that might be used in animal feeding rations. You all can read the objectives. The recommended reading for this section is Units 5 and 6 in your textbook. If you'd like to check those out, they're good resources in terms of some of the things that we'll be talking about in this particular section. Just some little background information here on the feed industry. First things first, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 million manufactured tons of feed each year, and that includes bulk feed, bag feed, feed products, additives, etc. So a really significant industry, piece of the industry that we're talking about. And that is done across somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 feed mills. And all of those, if they mix medication in their feed, they must register with the FDA by law. And they also are overseen and regulated by the United States Department of Agriculture. Those feed mills might be churning out anything from a simple grind and mix feed, which would be a meal, to things like cakes or pellets or crumbles, wafers, blocks, tubs, etc. All those things come out of your feed mills. And then that feed is distributed across somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 outlets, whether that's at your local cooperative or your local favorite local farm store like a Buckeye or a Rural King or Tractor Supply that we have here in this area. So if we look at feed labels, and it's important to pause really quickly and talk about the importance of a feed label. And that is the primary method of communication from the manufacturer to you, the customer, and is required on all feed. All commercial feed products, whether it's bulk or bag, it must have a feed label on it. And so that feed tag must include the things that are listed here on the screen. The identification of the product, the way it's intended to be utilized, feeding instructions, other cautionary information. It should have the net weight on it, and that net weight is checked. So if it is supposed to be a 50-pound bag, it must contain at least 50 pounds of feed in it. It will always have the company and trade name of the product, as well as some communication information. If it is medicated, it must by law list the active ingredient and the withdrawal period on it. And then it will also finally include a guaranteed analysis, which covers either minimums or maximums of the items that are listed here on the screen. And then lastly, it will also many times include an ingredient list listed in order of weight or most greatest proportion in the bag or the mix. As we transition then and talk about feed additives, and here it's important to note that we're going to exclude things that are minerals and vitamins. Those are nutrient feeds and therefore don't belong in the additive category. So anything that is then must be approved by the FDA. And generally speaking, this requires years and years of research by companies and universities to verify the efficacy of those products and what they do, and ensure that there will be no harmful effects not only to the animals but also to the product that those animals create, so that we ensure food safety for humans on the way down the line. Withdrawal times are really important so that we ensure that there are no antibiotic or otherwise residue in meat, milk, and eggs, and they must be followed closely. Many of your feed additive products, just for a frame of reference, we would be talking somewhere in the neighborhood of usually about 30 days withdrawal time. So that medication would have to be pulled out of the ration 30 days prior to the animal going to slaughter. And right now in the market, there's somewhere north of 1,000, approved products, and they might be for feed efficiency, disease treatment, deworming, and we'll look at some different examples here in the subsequent slides. So effective January 1 of 2017, and in an effort to contain and slow down the risk of bacterial resistance to antibiotics and overfeeding of antibiotics, the United States legislature passed a law that now all of those medications must be prescribed by veterinarians and have a veterinary feeding directive in order to add medication to your feed. And there is a list, and we'll visit about that in more detail in class, of the feeds that require VFDs. In addition, those VFDs must be written by a veterinarian with which you have a veterinary client-patient relationship. So they must know your operation, and they also must be in your same state, which is a little bit awkward from time to time. So any feed that contains a medication, if it's mixed, it must have a prescription VFD come along with it. And again, you have to have that written approval, and those veterinarians must be familiar with your operating practice on the farm, and they will have to have evaluated the necessity of that feeding program and that medication to be added. And you must only feed it to the animals according to the directions, and of course observe all the withdrawal times and things of that nature. Not everything is on the list yet. The list does expand, I believe, here very soon, and again we'll review that list in class. But when we talk about risks, ultimately the veterinarian is signing off on it, but it is always the producer's responsibility to ensure that there are no residues in the meat, milk, or eggs. So it is the producer's responsibility to feed it correctly to the prescribed animals. So even though they're making the veterinarian sign off on it, that doesn't necessarily put them in terms of high on the list in terms of accountability for any mistakes that might happen. Okay, so let's talk some examples here. And the first category that we'll look at is antibiotics. The purpose of antibiotics is, of course, either bacteriostatic or bactericidal. And you might say, well, what is the difference in those two things? A bacteriostat only limits bacterial growth. It doesn't necessarily kill it. So if you have a raging infection problem with bacteria, it might knock it back, but it won't necessarily eliminate that bacteria. That's what a bactericide is for. Bactericidal medications will then kill that particular pathogen, in this case a bacteria. You can also have coccidiostats and coccidiocides, virostats and viricides, things of that nature. But they are fed to reduce or prevent bacterial infections, improve average daily gain, and feed efficiency. Some of the example products that you might find here, chlorotetracycline, oxytetracycline, monensin, and lasalicid, and those are all active ingredients. The next category then are chemotherapeutics. These either might be organic or inorganic compounds which help inhibit organism growth within animals. And again, here you get a payback in terms of average daily gain, feed efficiency, and overall health. And some examples that you might find here are arsenalic acid and carbadox, very commonly used in swine diets, especially baby pigs. Anthelmintics is the next category, and these are for the treatment or prevention of parasites in your medications. And so you would see examples of things like Safeguard, which is a very commonly utilized feed grade product. Carries that dewormer in an alfalfa meal type mix in a pellet, and you feed that in their feed, very acceptable, and it helps eliminate gastrointestinal parasites and some of the other parasitic organisms that might be in the body. In addition, you can use products like ivermectin or Rumetel that also are available for anthelmintic purposes. Coccidiostats and coccidiocides I mentioned briefly earlier. They are utilized for the treatment and prevention of coccidiosis, which is cocci is a parasitic organism that thrives in the lower gut and in the large intestine, especially of ruminants. And So what that does is once the coccidia reaches too high a population, then it causes all kinds of gastrointestinal problems. Animals will lose hair, they'll have diarrhea, especially blood-streaked diarrhea. They'll lose weight, they'll look really, really unthrifty, kind of a rough-looking hair coat when they get coccidiosis. And so you can add the products decoquinate, losalicid, or monensin to those feeds, and that will help either control or kill your risk of coccidiosis. And coccidia is something that you do not want to acquire because those spores and those cocci, once they are shed in your facility, they're very, very hardy and very difficult to get rid of. The next category are probiotics. Again, fed generally when we talk about probiotics for the increase or balance of beneficial bacteria in your gut, whether it's the traditional monogastric stomach or the ruminant stomach. It's very, very helpful to have those bacteria flourishing in the proper proportions. And so therefore, it also helps reduce toxic byproducts of digestion. So you feed some of these probiotics in order to support that proper flora in your gut. And that will then in turn support rate of gain of feed and feed efficiency issues, just like we've talked about all the way along, and occasionally helps alleviate or minimize stressors, or helps return a stomach that has suffered some disease back to a normal flora, fauna, bacterial population in the stomach that helps kind of with proper digestion. These can be in the form of a feed additive. You might be able to mix them in your water supply. You can put them in a bolus or gel form, tablets, things of that nature. There's all kinds of ways to feed a probiotic, and they are generally speaking very, very effective. The next one here then are hormone products, and these kind of are fed either to activate or inhibit hormone functions. Generally speaking, they produce the same response as a natural hormone, so it mimics exactly what a natural hormone might do. And a couple examples here are melangestrol acetate, or MGA. And this product really, really acts exactly like progesterone. So if you have heifers in a feedlot that you don't plan to breed, they're going to be sold on the rail or sold for meat just like a steer would be. Anytime that they come into heat, every 21 days, that results in reduced rate of gain, not only for that animal, but they generally disrupt the whole pen. And so it helps by inhibiting that estrus behavior, which then in turn stimulates growth and improves their feed efficiency. There's also some growth stimulant implants, not really feed grade, but they are mentioned in your text, so I in turn add them here as well. As we get to finishing up this Unit 5 lecture, kind of a brief one-segment section here, some other things that you might find. Things that are fed for enteritis or dysentery control, which you'll find some repeating products there. Things that are fed for liver abscesses and control and treatment of that. Items that are fed for ketosis treatment, which is propylene glycol. You can feed things for fly control, and what that does, whether you're feeding Rabon or Clarify, that product comes through in the manure, and then whenever your flies lay their eggs on, the larvae are then not able to hatch and survive, and so it cuts down your fly population. Those actually work pretty well. And then, of course, we have products for bloat control, like oxytetracycline or paloxolene can help with bloat risk. So a few other things that might come into play as well as we, again, get to wrapping up is things that we can feed for the treatment and prevention of foot rot and general stress. Buffers out there. Now, those obviously are nutrients. Sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide are nutrients. But on occasion, they can be fed outside of the ration for buffer purposes. And then we've got things like antioxidants and pellet binding agents. So, wrapping up this section, I really appreciate your time and attention. I'll look forward to discussing the appropriate application of these products in class.